everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Freedom Filled Life podcast. I'm your co-host, Shay, and we have Cassie on the other mic as well as per usual. So today we're excited because actually Cassie is going to be interviewing me today, and we're going to be talking about my part-time CEO schedule. So for those of you who don't know, I talk about this a lot inside of our Scale with Purpose mastermind program, but this past year I have been experimenting with my schedule. So I'm going to talk about 4-day work weeks, part-time days, taking time off, seasonality, all the things today to talk about how you can create a schedule that works well for you, giving you a lot of balance and room for yourself and self-care, which I am a big proponent of. So without further ado, let's get into it today. So Cass, I'm going to hand it over to you to kick us off with some questions to get the vibe going so I can dive into the things that we're going to talk about today.
So fun. I feel like you're in the hot seat today.
I know.
So, ooh. I have a lot of fun questions. And I think for everybody listening too, in case you wanted just a little bit of context, here at Bucket List Bombshells, Shay's kind of formal title is COO, so Chief of Operations. And I have the CEO title, which for a long time, we kind of were doing a lot of the same things and doubling down basically on the same tasks. And after a while, it became very apparent to us that we could really utilize our skill sets better by more formally defining our roles. And Shay, I'm sure you'll talk about that when you kind of get into the actual type of tasks and work that you're doing. Mm-hmm. But we have very different roles in the company, and you and I obviously have different personality types. So I'm excited to learn a bit more too, just about how you structure your work week. And I think it's going to be really fantastic for those of you listening that have a similar personality type or even skill set as Shay does.
Yeah, I actually love that you brought that up because I feel like even this past year, I feel like our roles have been even more defined. And we'll talk about that as to why I think with just the changes to our business model. For those of you who haven't listened to the episode we recorded a couple weeks ago, so where we talked about how we migrated over from a course model to a coaching model, I think that there became just a different sales funnel process within that. So it'll be really interesting to talk about that in more detail as to I even think this year we have become even more autonomous or separate in what we do, which means that my schedule looks so different to yours. And I'm excited to talk about that today for those who are more in that operation side, structure side of things and really like having structure, I guess. So this episode is for those of you who like structure. And I did experiment, but I will say that my schedule is very structured, and that gives me a lot of peace, I would say, and enjoyment out of my work weeks.
Yeah, I love that. And it's interesting too. I'm glad we're talking about this because obviously the 4-day work week is quite normal now. It's been, I think I have seen it talked about over the last, I would say year or two in the entrepreneurial space as kind of the pinnacle of success, you're making multi-millions and you're working 4-day work weeks. And while I'm sure that can be a goal for many people, and obviously you're going to talk about, your experiment over the past year and how that worked for you, I think it's cool to kind of peel back the curtain and just talk about the reality behind it and if it's really working for you, your personality type, your schedule, rather than having this blanket version of success for entrepreneurs and you should be working a 4-day work week. And you and I are always questioning the way things are done and experimenting. And so I think that is part of entrepreneurship. But so I think that's another reason why I think it's so interesting to be able to peel back the curtain a bit and talk about your particular experience. So let's get into my questions that I have. First question that, I always like to know the why behind things. What really inspired you to try this 4-day work week experiment for the past year? And what were you really hoping to achieve when you started this 4-day work week schedule?
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I think it's a little bit to do with what you had just said, was that I saw other entrepreneurs doing 4-day work week, pinnacle of success. And I'm like, I'm successful. I get caught up in that sometimes, the shoulds. And I'm like, oh, I should be working a 4-day work week because if I'm not, then like, am I not on the same level of success? And I think that's I don't feel like that's something I bring into my daily life, but it does creep in every so often. And I feel I was seeing, oh, the corporations moving towards it and all these benefits that they were describing. And then, like you said, there was, I feel like, a rise in the entrepreneur world. So I think at first it was put on my radar because people I looked up to were doing it and they were having so much success with it. And they were just like what you said, just toting it as this like pinnacle of you need to do the 4-day work week. That's going to be just so amazing for you. So that was one of the things. And then I would say the other thing was because at that time I was trying to figure out my schedule just wasn't working for me. So it's not necessarily that I was burnt out from my work week, but I definitely felt like it was not very efficient. I was feeling like I get to the end of the week and I still had a really high to-do list. I'd be sort of looking forward to the weekend to just have a break. And I typically don't feel that way about, even in the past 10 years, about the work that we do. And I'm sure entrepreneurs feel that way too. We start these businesses because we love the work that we do. So it wasn't necessarily that I was like, oh my gosh, I need more time and space, just wanting like an extra day to like a to-do day, almost like an errand day, and then a full weekend was kind of the vibe I was getting. And I thought, it just that didn't really like land with me because it wasn't really how I was feeling. But I thought, oh, maybe if I have like other very hobbyist, I have personal projects. I'm an avid learner, avid reader, avid. So I thought, oh, I'll have a Friday. I'm going to get all my MITs, all my most important tasks, all my things done, 4 days, and I'm going to have like this day to just like move other things in my life forward and become like, I don't know, launch other things. I think as entrepreneurs, we always are thinking about other things to do. And so that was a little bit of it. But when I looked at my to-do list, kind of to touch on the MITs, was I just felt like my work week just was not very efficient. And I feel like things were just getting to the end of the week and I still feel like I have so much to do. But I was like, what did I even do this week? And so I think that one of the studies I had read that led me to want to try the 4-day work week was really the studies around how you become more efficient and are able to kind of cut the fluff and just really focus on the things that have to get done because now you have a shorter time frame to get them done. So those were kind of the things that sort of led to this wanting to experiment with a 4-day work week specifically.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up because I do think that knowing you, work-life balance has always been something that has been so important to you. And so it makes sense if, especially for someone like you who is doing operations and you are so efficient, you do have a lot of tasks and responsibility on your plate. I can see how, if you didn't feel like your schedule was working for you, you were seeing so many other entrepreneurs being like, ooh, like this is work-life balance, 4-day work weeks. And so I can totally see the glitz and glamour of why you decided to try it. But you mentioned specifically MITs, which you also mentioned most important task for those of you who aren't familiar with the terminology. That kind of leads into what I'm curious about, like the structure of how you were structuring your 4-day work week. And, were you focusing on like specific tasks or themes for each day? I feel like that is, from the outside anyways, a big question that I always had seeing entrepreneurs, implementing a 4-day work week.
Yeah.
It's like, how are they getting everything done? If you are prioritizing work-life balance too, how are you fitting all of that into a 4-day week?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that when I looked at kind of going back to just the way our business model changed, and there were certain things now I do sales calls now, I need time in my schedule for that. I need time in my schedule for recording podcasts, for hosting workshops, like these very specific, and then of course, coaching calls, these very specific live events, essentially me having to show up at a specific time. That is also, I think, one of the things that really pushed me into a 4-day work week, because I felt like, oh my gosh, I'm showing up for these things that needed my live attention. I didn't have any structure around them. They were scheduled when they were scheduled. And I thought, this is great. I love it. I get so much out of those things. And if I look at those are my most important things. I need to show up for coaching calls for our clients. I need to be on sales calls or strategy calls, showing up for our community and our potential clients. I need to be on a podcast interview, and I need to be hosting live workshops. Like, those things are my most important tasks. So I think it's really important to evaluate what is moving the needle in your business that does require your time. Now, there's team members to support you. There's also, in my scenario, a partner to support you. So your MITs may look different than mine. So you want to look at what are those things that are propelling like your business forward that absolutely need your time. No one else on my team could show up for those live events. Like, they are me. I'm on those things. So that's where I started first. And I thought, you know what, these things, they require a different mindset. So to be a coach, or to be in sales mode, or to be hosting a live workshop, it's a different brain power, I think, or a different, I don't know what the word would be, but a different energy, a different kind of hat that you're wearing. And so for me, I noticed that that was starting to be the first thing that I didn't like about my schedule, was trying to switch gears. And they talk about that too with Pomodoro techniques and with MITs, is this like getting into one task and one frame of mind is how you are going to be more productive, I think, is really like the studies around productivity. But for that, that is also something I noticed. So when you look at your MITs, is there groupings around basically using the same, whether that's brain muscle or like strategy or whatever it is, the term that you would put those kind of grouping them together. So that's what I did. And I said, okay, I'm going to start putting some boundaries around my day, my week. And then one of them was I wanted Fridays off. And I'll speak to that in my experimentation and result of what that looked like. But that was my frame. I was like, okay, I have 4 days. So Monday through Thursday, I then dedicated specific days. Specific days are coaching days, specific, like Wednesdays, coaching. Tuesdays is usually part coaching and, well, primarily coaching and sometimes part strategy calls, but we're going to break those up. So it's going to be morning batch, evening batch of calls. Thursday, that's going to be workshops, podcasts, interviews, different content creation style mode. And that was where I was able to start batching, in a sense. I'm sure everyone's, that's a term I just love, like batching and MITs. That's how I started to structure my days. So then I put boundaries first around my schedule. And then I chose not to schedule anything for myself on Mondays, because I feel like the way that you start your week really has an effect on the way that you end your week. And that's just a personal thing. And so there I was like, well, there's other things as an operations girly in the back end, and other management things, other client things, just other important things that need to get done. I'd rather feel like I'm getting these other things done on a Monday and then be able to have those other block days for showing up, and then showing up live, which, like I said, had kind of just has different energies around it. So that's how I chose to structure my days. And then also what came out of that was I noticed just, I don't want to say like fluff, but there's this thing in Run Like Clockwork book from Adrian Dorison that's trash, trim, transfer. And when I looked at my list after I had scheduled and batched in my MITs, looking at my list, I was like, you know what? Some of this stuff, is stuff that was actually not needed to push the business forward. So either if it's something that has to get done, transfer it to a team. If it is something that you're kind of realize, well, why am I doing this? Like, is it really contributing? Is it really necessary? Like, be honest with yourself. Don't just hand it over to a team member. Look at it, honestly say, like, does this really need to get done? Or is it something I think needs to get done? For me, a lot of stuff was just kind of like automatic tasks that had just been maybe from the past that just kept rolling over. And that for me, they were like, made sense. It was like comforting. I was like, yes, that's what I always do. But evaluate it and trash it. Get rid of it if it's not necessary. So then trim, it's kind of, for me, it's like automate it or reduce it in terms of like the capacity that is needed for it. Like, just, again, evaluating it. A lot of times my task became either something that was trash or transfer. And if it wasn't, then I realized if it wasn't an MIT, then it needed to come last. So at the end of my day, as I'm doing my daily wrap up, I do have about an hour of my time at the end of my day where I do those things. There are certain things that just need to get done, whether it's admin, whether it's finances, whether it's things that you can't transfer or don't want to transfer to a team member. I do those less brain heavy MIT things towards the end of my day. And the way that I was really able to get down to a 4-day work week was primarily around either transferring or trashing. So yeah, so that's how I transitioned down to a 4-day work week from like an operational perspective.
Yeah, it's so helpful to hear like how you actually transitioned from working, full day weeks to the 4 days. And I love that you brought up trash, trim, and transfer, and also kind of touched on, what I think is some of your best strength, which is like you're so great at
Mm,
consistency and routine and staying on top of consistent tasks, routine tasks. And I think for everyone, like your greatest strength can also sometimes be a weakness if you're not looking at it
mm,
and evaluating those consistent tasks, those routine tasks. I know that there's tasks that are recurring inside of our project management system, Asana, and you could just mindlessly be checking things off
yep.
without really evaluating for, as an entrepreneur and a business owner, like your role as CEO, you are called in most of your days to be thinking very strategically. Even in the couple of hats that you mentioned that you're wearing, you are called to be 100% on those, using your full energy versus
Yeah.
just kind of like checking off some things there. So can you kind of speak to, for maybe other, someone who's listening that has like a similar personality type as you and loves consistency, loves routine, is just like, yeah, have my consistent, tasks that I do every single week. Like, how do you really analyze what tasks are just not really worth your time
Mm,
versus really highlighting those things that are moving the business forward? Because I think for a lot of our clients that have a similar personality type than you, we talk about this and it's still like that. I don't want to say deer in the headlights, but there is pushback with like, it is all important. Like everything there is important. Like these are all the tasks and it's just everything that I have to do. So it's like the trimming or the trashing really, and honestly guess the transfer too, like transferring it, some things we have clients will be like, yeah, but like I need to be the one to
mm,
like send that email. And we dive into that because I think that on a bigger scale, that type of mentality can really take a lot of your time away from these big things, these big tasks and responsibilities as a COO or even a CEO that are really meant to move the business forward
yeah.
versus operationally someone like you who could end up having just like, I don't know, 75% of your days be routine tasks
Yeah.
that a team member really could do. So, can
Yeah.
you kind of speak to how you have changed your mindset around that and how you
Yeah.
navigate just kind of like the duality, I guess, of that being such an amazing skill that you have, but also sometimes needing to evaluate that really and making sure that your schedule and your tasks and what you're spending your time doing is genuinely, like
Mm,
when we say moving the business forward, it's like moving a needle, and like nobody else on the team could really do that because it is your bread and butter, or
yeah.
as Run Like Clockwork calls it, your queen bee role, whatever it is, it's like your special sauce nobody else can do, and that you are spending the majority of
Yeah.
your days and your times doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, well, yeah, definitely because we've talked about this with and helped our clients. So I want to speak to like the type of business that we have and as coaches, and then the type of business that service-based providers doing a one-on-one service for in like graphic design or website design or content marketing and how we've helped them. So the first thing I would think about is that when we think about how does it contribute to our business growth, the easiest one, first off, is it a direct return on investment? So for example, you are probably going to continue to maintain to be the salesperson at this, depending on what stage of business you're in. That can be handed off at some point, but I would say that The majority of the time, sales conversions, so live sales conversions, so a sales call is most likely where our clients still maintain those calls. They're building the relationship. So client relationships are probably one of the biggest pieces that is still probably on you, but you can create a client experience without actually having to deliver the service per se. Now, as a coach, we deliver the service. It's us showing up and giving our knowledge. So for me, I will always need to be on coaching calls in our structure. Now, I've seen other membership structures where they bring other coaches in, and that would be part of the sell and the sale that they have. Right now, we sell us our time. So for sales calls, typically in our structure and in our client structure, I would say that is very easy to say that's a direct return on investment, okay? Because that's related to revenue. The second thing that we're talking about when it comes to your business is what I mentioned is customer service. To make sure that we are providing an amazing customer experience, you're getting testimonials, you're getting recurring clients, you're getting raving fans. You want to think about that next. What role do you play in attributing to customer service and the end result of what the customer is getting? That does not mean a lot of our website designers, they don't necessarily design the website. They have junior designers for that are trained to execute on the deliverables, but they still sometimes are still the person that maybe gets on the strategy call. Think about higher level things. What are things that people are hiring you to do? So strategy, consultation, anything that requires your knowledge, your expertise, but the actual doing of the work is not of like a deliverable for, let's say, website design is just the easiest one, but basically any service base is not necessarily the thing that is moving the needle. And it's the biggest area that I see that our clients think that they can't give up. And then they hire and they're like, have this amazing experience. And the clients are just as excited because hiring is a skill. Hiring the right people is a skill. There is someone out there that can produce the same quality as you can produce in your style as well. I promise you that because we see it all the time with our clients. And so that's what I want you to think about is like, you want to think about direct revenue return. You want to think about the customer experience. What role do you play at a high level? And then the other thing would be around building your brand or building your presence. You are the CEO, or in my scenario, COO. That is a top level role. You are the face of the company. So that's probably where, when it comes to certain types of content creation, or let's say being on a podcast, creating your thought leadership, stepping into that role that is propelling your business forward. Sending an email, sending a contract, creating a proposal. These are not things that are propelling your business forward. They are, yes, getting your money that you need in. They are taking care of the client. They are these things that you're probably doing that feel important, especially because you get that dopamine hit of an easy, quick task you just check off. But when we're evaluating where we are best spent, it needs to be in more of that leadership position that is truly pushing the business forward. So I would rather you spend more time focusing on, say, landing podcasts, doing workshops, landing interviews, articles, showing up to networking events, showing up to wherever your sales funnel, top level, where you're needed in your sales funnel, versus some of more of the, say, maybe behind the scenes things, or more of the, even I guess would say operational things, stuff that you can hand off, and then even the client work you can hand off as well. Just being really honest with yourself on where your time is best spent to genuinely push the business forward. It would be those three areas, in my opinion.
That was so helpful and such a great description. And I think, I'm sure there are some CEOs, business owners who are listening who are very good at operations. And we often find that our clients who fit this role very well. Like, you are the business owner, you don't have a business partner, so your label or title is the CEO, but you are so good at operations that probably if you had a CEO, you would be the COO. And to identify yourself means that you have been good at managing your task. You have a very clear project management system, or at least task list space for the projects that you do. You like organizing. You have very organized processes. It's easy for you to send contracts. It's easy for you to send proposals. It's easy for you to be in your inbox. Like all of the behind the scenes, which is why you are a successful business owner. You have been good behind the scenes at managing and operating a business. But where we usually see those types of business owners reach a point of getting stuck and, plateauing in their revenue and wanting to scale, but not sure how to go beyond that. I think it's exactly like you said. It is that focus on sales and lead generation, because for the types of businesses that we serve and the size that they still are the salesperson. Like you said, they still are the face of the business. Are the ones taking discovery calls. They're the ones, on interviews, on podcasts. But I think because you love operations so much, and that's what is easy and that's what's more natural. And for a lot of our clients too, that kind of fit this criteria, they just love being behind the scenes. They love working with the clients. And so pushing to be more front facing, to even to get on podcast interviews or to host a signature workshop, like to do those things that we would consider more marketing focus or lead generation focus, is like, ooh, maybe I'll do that tomorrow. And then tomorrow really never comes. And so when we talk to these types of clients, we're like, yeah, what are your, organic marketing strategies or lead generation efforts? It's like, I don't really have them. I am running a successful business through word of mouth, because they're so good at what they do operationally.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned that, because when I said podcast workshops, that is lead gen. So that is also something you can tie back to return on our business growth, return on investment as well. So it would be like lead gen efforts, sales efforts, and customer experience, especially going back to word of mouth. Most of the women coming into our programs, they haven't done much lead gen because they're mostly have been creating an amazing customer experience that is getting word of mouth. And I don't want you to lose that. So that is a key piece. But there's a lot of customer service that you probably don't need to be doing. Think about customer experience versus customer service as just like an extra tidbit I wanted to add on to my response.
So let's get back to your
Yes.
year-long 4-day work week schedule. I want to know, what did you love over the past year of trying out or working a 4-day work week? And because I know you pretty much did this to a T, or at least you knew every week, like, okay, like not working on Friday. And I love that about you, because if it's in your schedule, you're going to do it. Or if it's not in your schedule, you're not going to do it. And I envy you a little bit, because I put things in my schedule and there's a 50-50 chance it may or may not get done. So we're not talking about that. For those of you that don't know Shay,
That's
like
funny.
she was prioritizing a year-long 4-day work week schedule. And so I want you guys to know that I'm sure that you tried to stick to this every single week. So what did you love? What didn't you love?
Yeah, no, I really like that question. And I also want to say that I thought this was going to be an indefinite thing, but it ended up being a year-long thing, exactly probably like to what I'm going to speak as to, like, you're probably like, why? I didn't go into it being like, this is 1 year, because like what Cass said, when I commit to something, like that's it. That's what I do. And I do it for the rest of my life. And as long as it's on my calendar. So what I loved about it was it helped me streamline my schedule. And when I realized that I couldn't really pinpoint what wasn't working with my schedule, that I was getting to the end of the week and just being like, I'm so happy the weekend is here in a sense. And I don't like that feeling. And so that was the first thing I really loved, was it just helped me really do trash trim transfer, but really batch my schedule in a way that I've always wanted it to be batched. And then to also be just so clear on, like, if nothing else gets done, these are my, like, I scheduled these things, I batched these things, like these things got done. And those were the things that moved the business forward. So I would say The first was just that my schedule became so much more like peaceful again. And because of my personality type, I don't like, again, that scattered schedule and feeling like I had these crazy long to-do lists when like really just taking some time because they build up over time. What I loved is I actually carved out intentional time to create a 4-day work week was allowing me to actually say, oh, let me evaluate what's on my list. So I'd say that was what I really loved because my schedule just became then a piece, something that gave me peace and contentment versus it being like starting my work week and just being like, okay, I need to make sure all of this gets done. But then like, I also have all of these tasks and really not having structure around it, which is what I like to have. So that was the first thing. And then the second thing I would say is that when my year, I did a lot of traveling this year. And I would say that like seasonally, I noticed just looking back at the year that like the 4-day work week was really great during times where, like, for example, when I was in Portugal and I had a 3-day weekend to like explore. I was living in Lisbon and I did so much exploration. I used that Friday to do something I loved. And that was my original intention for the 4-day work week was like, I want to be doing something for me, whether it's for work-life balance or education or moving something forward. So I did something for me on those Fridays. And then I had my weekend, my regular weekend. I had a lot of fun stuff to do every weekend when I'm traveling. And that felt good. So it was really great in that sense. And then for my 4-day work weeks, to give some context as well, is I was working full 8-hour days. And then on my Fridays, I would have off, and it just felt so good. I felt so accomplished from my days. I felt my days were just so um, productive, and it felt great. And then I had these time off. Then, especially, and then over the summer, also felt that way. Although I noticed starting to kind of not really use my Fridays as much, and kind of going into things that maybe started to shift for me was that when I was in a more routine place of my life, like when I was in Austin or when I'm here in Canada, like my life itself is more routine. My social calendar is more routine. I have my specific workouts, I have my specific things where I ended up finding that I wasn't really that Friday sort of like I'd start to kind of do some work things on the Friday just to like catch up on things or things that, again, if I really evaluated them, they probably weren't MITs. It just kind of was like, well, what else am I doing with this Friday? Like it just started to kind of feel like I wasn't burnt out. My schedule was like so streamlined. I loved how it was batched. My 4 days were so good. But it just sort of started to feel like this Friday was not as intentional. Cass and I are very intentional people. And so even though I like structure and routine, if something feels like there's no purpose to why I'm doing it, it really starts to kind of like annoy me. I'm not gonna lie. So this Friday just sort of became like a day. And this day was almost like an errand day. And like for me, I just don't really need an errand day. So I just kind of started using it like that. So I would say that for me, it started to be like, well, there's fun things going on that I want to work on. But because I'm such a structured, logical person, I was like, but I don't work Fridays. So whenever I would work, it would just feel like like it would feel like it's scratchy, essentially. It just like didn't make sense because that's not what I was supposed to do. And everybody talked about like this 4-day work week is so good and you're so successful. And I was like, but like I'm not really doing anything with this extra Friday. And that's sort of what I noticed both when I was in Austin earlier in the year. When I first started it, it was great because it was like new and fresh, but I would still, if I look back, like I wasn't really like needing quote unquote this Friday for whatever successful people need this Friday for. And then we also when my life was really full and of travel and instability in a good way was when it worked really well for me because I was so focused in on just like getting everything done in the 4 days. And then winter comes and you're staying in more. You're what's it called? You're like cozying up. You're like, I'm like, ooh, I want to be online. I want to work. I want to be doing things. And so what I started to experiment at the end of last quarter was because this 4-day work week just wasn't making sense to me anymore. It just kind of felt like this random extra day that I had to do nothing. We were creating, like when you're in creation mode, as entrepreneurs know, you want to be working. So I just kept working, especially in the winter time. And then I kind of realized I would rather have, we talk a lot about this with our clients as a part-time CEO schedule. And what does that mean? I thought that was like the 4-day work week. That's like part time. But if I really think about it, like part time is what, like 20 hours, 30 hours, if you want to get like nitty gritty about it, of like working. So 5 hours a day for 5 days a week would be 25 hours. And if you were like being really nitty gritty about it. And so I just was like, well, what if I just took this Friday back, so to speak, as like a work day, but not take on more, like, don't take on more like frivolous work. Like, I was like, hey, I'm not going to fill this with just tasks. I wanted to see, what if I spread my days out, especially here in the wintertime up north. The sun sets so early at 4. And so I think everything is with experimenting. It was cool to see that. I was like, oh, like, I don't, it's cold and it's like 4 o'clock and it's like, yes, I'm working on these things and I'm like, it's great, but I have more energy when the sun is up. And so I changed it around and I didn't work more. I just want to preface, I didn't work more hours. I spread it out now to be still part-time, but I spread it out to be over 5 days and have shorter work days. And I actually found, I did this for about 2 months, and I found that this was a better fit for me, at least in this season of my life. What is cool though is now I know that, let's say, for example, I am going to go on another extended trip. If I think about, okay, cool, I'm going to go away for another 2 months. Like, I really liked working 4 days, having three days off to do my explorations, to do my thing. Like, I know it worked. And so that's where I love experimentation. So what I really loved about the schedule was it worked in a certain time, a certain like structure of my life. And I know that I could always go back to that. And like that structure, when my life is in a very, very stable place where my life has a lot of structure to it. And in that structure, this part-time CEO role brings me the same things that all of these people say about a successful 4-day work week. Then just remember, like, you get to choose. I think I forget that sometimes, like, you get to choose your schedule. And like in some seasons of my life, 4-day work week, awesome. Other seasons of my life, balanced, more like half day work week, work days work best for me, is kind of the takeaway that I had from this past year.
I love that you talked very specifically about different seasons of life and how you've adapted your schedule around that, because I do think that it is one of the coolest benefits of
Mm,
being an entrepreneur and having so much control over how you run your schedule. And like you just
yeah,
said, sometimes you can get into a habit that you forget a little bit that you do have full control over your days, how you spend your time, how you structure your weeks. And I know for a lot of women in our community who aren't running a business, that is one of the biggest reasons that they want to be able to have a full-time online business, is to be able to fully control their schedule. And so I think it's really cool to hear how you've adapted your schedule for different seasons of life. And I would imagine, because we have been doing this for quite a long time, you will continue to adapt your schedule in other upcoming seasons of life,
yeah.
and just other responsibilities or other things that are important to you or that you want to spend your time doing. So I think it does give just a lot of a reminder to look at your schedule, make sure it's working for your season of life. And I feel like if it's not, then you've probably had that scratchy feeling, like Shay mentioned, like it will feel not in alignment. And I think that is a good indicator that you can shift. And maybe it's just a short shift. Like you mentioned, you're in Portugal for 2 months. That's a 2-month shift of your
Yeah.
schedule that you were able to do. And then now, when you are back in Canada, you adapt your schedule differently. And then even like literally to the season, like
That too. Yeah.
winter season,
Yeah.
versus summer season. And
Yeah.
I know from having also lived in Canada, summer season has a lot of social time, so
Yeah.
many more activities than winter. So it's just really cool to see how you are adapting your schedule for the different seasons of life. I'm curious if you can, as we start to wrap up this episode, and for those who are like very
Yeah.
logistical and they want to know, like, tell me the schedule. So can
Yeah.
you walk us through what a typical like day or week
Yeah.
looks like, and not just for work, like how you're also integrating work-life balance
Mhm.
into this schedule to achieve this part-time CEO schedule that you're now doing for 2025?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I think was the biggest takeaway, was that it was less about when I work and it was more about what I work on. And that is probably the biggest takeaway I want for everybody, is really focusing on where your time is being spent. And of course, we love work-life balance. So a typical week for me would be, I love a good morning routine. I personally love working out in the morning. I think physical health and mental health are just set the foundation for your work as well, and how you're able to show up and the capacity that you have to show up in your business. And so for me, I always prioritize working out, eating a really big breakfast, and journaling and doing some guided visualizations, meditation, and prayer work. And so my mornings start quite early. I would say I wake up at 6:30 and I go and work out right away. And so I'm not starting my day until 10 a.m., my work day. And that sort of, at first, that felt like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm starting a bit late in the day, but it's actually been working out really well for me. So it sounds a little bit like I have a very long morning, to be honest, but it works really well for me to set me up for my work day. I feel like the things I do in my morning time, so that I get started around 10 a.m., and like I said, depending on the day. So on a Monday, I don't do anything where I'm showing up live. So it's very much focused on anything in the back end that is moving the business forward, whether we're creating something for one of our programs, whether I'm doing something that is very specific operationally. Again, it's stuff that moves the business forward, planning and prepping for something. I want to get into something and be able to just give 100% to that. So Mondays is to really set the stage and I don't leave things to Fridays. If it's like a big project or a big thing, I want to get started on it on Monday, but it means I might not finish things on Monday. So don't put that pressure on you. It's more so that I like to I want to take a chunk. I want to take a bite. I'm going to have probably like 30%, 40% of something that's not going to even maybe get done that week. Like maybe it's something that we're working on that is going to be get done in a big project that's getting done in a month or something. So I want to make sure that I feel good that I'm taking like a chunk of that and moving something forward there. And then on Tuesdays is going to be half coaching and half either sales or strategy calls. And then Wednesdays is all coaching. And then Thursdays is either podcast interviews, live workshop hosting, or sales calls, strategy calls. And then now Fridays are also for taking another big bite, which has been cool. And that's something I've really enjoyed now because, like I said, in the season of my life right now, I want to be online and working and moving projects forward. So that, and then anything that does that maybe in my 1 hour that I had mentioned earlier on the podcast, or at the end of my day, I end my day with sort of like I don't know what you would call that, but just like a cap to the day. Emails that I have to do, there are still some emails that I need to handle in my inbox. There's other like admin-y things that just need to get done. Finances, manage all of our finances, that kind of stuff. Cap at the end of the day. And then if anything rolls over, I do have that Friday to sort of do things again. You don't want to start a big project on a Friday, because my clients really struggled with this. I had 2 clients in Scale with Purpose that they would try and block off Fridays for starting big projects, and then they would never start them, which is why on a Monday, at least even if you did 2% of that project, there's like psychology wise, it's actually going to motivate you to pick back up on it on another day of the week. So I highly recommend not trying to start something new on a Friday, but that's where I'll just continue working on something, creative work. That's where I like to do that on a Friday now. That makes me feel like I'm ending the week in this really like fun, positive way for me. So that's what a typical day work week looks like. And right now, because like I said, seasonality of when the sun goes down, I usually am wrapping up my day around 4 o'clock. And then I'm really into like soups and stews and like hearty meals right now and reading and spending a lot of time with like my family. And so that's what my evenings look like. You know, they get off work and then they have evenings. So I have a lot of where I am right now, my community is structured in a much more of a 9 to 5 structure. So also when what Cass was mentioning, what does a work week best serve you? My community at this time, their free time is in the evenings and on weekends. So I make sure that my evenings and weekends are free for them to spend time with me, for me to spend time with them. So that's what it looks like for me right now in this season. And that's what's cool. And Cass mentioned this already is now I'm excited because it's like, ooh, you know, let me look each season at what my schedule is going to look like.
I love that. That was very, very helpful just from like a tactical perspective. And I'm sure everybody listening would agree. I think for some of you, maybe who are like visual and you're like, okay, that was helpful, but like I want to see it in a calendar format. Like I want to see the week, I want to see the month, I want to see the batching. Shay has actually put together a free resource download for you. You can find it in the show notes. It's called your part-time CEO schedule blueprint. And it is essentially your schedule, Shay,
Yeah.
how you are batching out, you know, everything that you just talked about, how you're structuring your weeks, and then what that looks like in a monthly schedule, your work blocks, and then how you're prioritizing growth, hitting those big goals. And then, like you mentioned right now, spending time for the things that matter most to you, like family or a wellness or your self-care, working out, mindset, all of that stuff. So if you are curious what Shay's schedule looks like on a calendar format, you want to see the blocks. I know that our clients have really loved seeing the way you manage your schedule. So if you're curious about that, you can download the PDF. Just go to the link in the show notes. And I think it will be very inspirational for you to at least kind of start playing around with how you want to structure your own schedule. Awesome. Okay. As we wrap up, last question for you, Shay.
Oh, yeah.
I think for a lot of business owners who might be listening and who are considering a part-time CEO schedule or
Yeah.
maybe even a 4-day work week, because I think that's the more common term that we've all heard out there. What advice would you give them?
Yeah, I think where I would start, because it's very hard to go from 0 to 60, especially if you're not sure kind of how to get started. What I would do is I would spend 2 weeks tracking your time. Figure out where your time goes. Because yes, we can look at a task list of what we check off, but in the reality, we may have spent like 2 hours like scrolling something or looking for new content ideas or going through our email, and we thought it only was like, and it's one task list, but you don't realize you actually spent like 3 hours today in your inbox. Cause that's kind of the first things I hear from our clients is like, they don't understand where their time is going because they look at what they do and they're like, well, I don't know. All I did today was like answer emails. And so I would say just spend 2 weeks. You can use a timer app like Harvest, and you can just take a look or do it in a Google Sheet. It doesn't have to be like super, super strict. Just try and gauge like where your time is being spent. Just take back control of just knowing. Knowledge is power. Sometimes when we're burnt out, we just need to like actually give ourselves some cold hard facts about like what is leading, like what are we doing with our time. And so I would look at that.
So helpful. Well, this was fun, Shay. I love being able to interview you. I think we should do this style more often. Just really helpful to pick your brain, even from my side. And like you mentioned earlier on in the episode, we are very autonomous now in our work. So it is so cool to hear how you're structuring everything, and also to give everybody listening to a peek into how you run your schedule. And I know that's something that you take a lot of pride in. So hopefully you guys are very inspired and also got some very practical tips for how to manage your own schedule.
Yes, yes. This was really fun. I love this structure. And if anybody has any questions about getting their schedule structured, mine, if you have any other questions, of course, download the freebie that we have for you. But you can find me in the Instagram DMs at Buckleless Bombshells, and you can just shoot me a message and we can open up a conversation about how to get you down to whether it's a 4-day work week or a part-time CEO schedule. I'm happy to workshop with you in the DMs as well. All right, ladies. Well, I think that wraps up this episode. So thank you for listening and tuning in. And don't forget to grab your blueprint located in the show notes. And we will see you in another episode of the Freedom Filled Life podcast. Bye, ladies.
Bye.